Hello and welcome to The Inkwell, a podcast for those who love writing. Our today's guest is a Canadian author, novelist, and screenwriter, Christopher Grants. Chris has written 2 novels, he has developed 8 screenplays, and written 2 TV concepts, one of which is currently being considered by the National Canadian TV Broadcaster and Netflix. If you're passionate about writing and if you want to get some more insights into the craft, it doesn't matter if you're a new or a seasoned writer, I'm sure you're going to love our today's episode. So, without further ado, let's jump in. All right, we're live. So, hello, Christopher.
Hello, Paulius. That is how you pronounce it. Yes, Paulius.
Uh, Actually, my Lithuanian pronunciation of the name would be Paulus.
Paulius. Okay, good enough.
Yes, but for convenient purposes, we can call me Paul. This
Okay,
is always easier.
sure, Paul. Paul, it is.
If I can call you Chris
You can.
as well,
You can.
that's perfect. Right, Chris? Maybe let's begin with your early life in Africa. I wouldn't have expected that you have grown up in Kenya and also in Nigeria, if I'm correct.
That is correct. Yeah. My earliest memories actually are of Africa. I was born in Alberta, Canada,
Yes.
in a small town. We lived there for 2 years before, but at the age of two, I moved to Lagos, Nigeria, and lived there until 1968. 1968,
Okay.
we actually came back to North Dakota, where my father got his PhD, and then we went to, and in 1970 we went to Kenya. That's pretty much that's what I remember most about Africa is because that Nigeria. I hate to use the term segregated, but we were isolated in
Okay.
terms of our community. Like I didn't play with African children so much, right? The children I played with were
Right.
from European diplomats or aid agencies and stuff. So, yeah, but it was Kenya where I kind of learned the world.
During those kid years or teenage years,
Uh-huh.
were you already thinking about writing back then?
Yes, I started to read very early. Um, my father once told me I was reading at 4. I'm not sure whether that's possible, but I suffice to say that I was reading very very early. My parents couldn't spell anything around me because I could figure out what they were talking about. Um, and my mother was a big fan of spy thrillers and mysteries, so she had no problem with my reading her books. So by the time I was 7, I was reading James Bond and Harold Innes. Harold Innes. Yeah, and yeah, all of these. Um, all of her favorite writers became my favorite writers, and yeah, I could spend I spent as much time as I could reading because I loved being taken away and into this other world and living these other lives, and I wanted nothing more than to do that myself.
So when you think about writing in general, I know that you write novels. There are 2 novels also published on Medium. One of its names is The Father, the Son, and the Slave. And the other one is called The Last 3 Days. So the first question about the novels, to what kind of world would these novels take the reader? So let's say beginning with The Father, the Son, and the Slave, because novels take you in, they take you in for a ride. So where does this go?
I don't want to disappoint you, but um, my most of my writing is screenplays, scripts, movies. The novel actually was not an intentional project. I did not
Right.
sit down and said, "Okay, I'm going to write this novel." My growing up in Africa, um, I didn't have a lot of parental supervision. I didn't really
Right.
know my parents. My parents, like, they moved in diplomatic circles. They were always having dinner parties for these ambassadors and those ambassadors, and kids would get fed and sent off to the other part of the house. So I grew up with nannies and gardeners and cooks and stuff like that. And um, the only time I ever spent time with my parents was on vacation, and then we were traveling through Europe, or like we spend the summer in Greece or in Switzerland or Portugal or wherever. And it wasn't until we came back to Canada that my father felt that we, my brothers and I, had failed to identify with his Romanian Canadian heritage. By then I was 17. I really didn't give a shit about it. I was beyond it. I had this great childhood, man. I'd seen the world. I'd done all these things. I didn't need a rural Eastern European identity, right? Like that meant nothing to me. And it affected everything we did. We didn't get along at all. And it was even to the point when he died and we hadn't kind of reconciled. And I don't know, 5 or 6 years later, it started to really bother me the fact that I didn't have this relationship with my father that I've seen everybody else, like other people have. And I started to wonder, well, how much, I mean, I was 17, 18, 19. How much of that was my fault as opposed to, like, was I just being a jerk, right, to him? Like, should I have given him a little more leeway, And so then I started to try to figure out why, like what were the issues, and this is what I eventually figured out, that it was his father who was pressuring him and making him feel really bad because we hadn't absorbed this Romanian Canadian culture, and so I began to forgive him, but at the same time realized that I had the notes and the journals that I'd written about this, like there's a really good father-son conflict story there, right? And like these filial themes that were universal. And so I thought, okay, well, what about a novel? But I didn't want to write an autobiographical novel. So I was looking for uh, an epic father and son relationship that I could take advantage of. And of course, Jesus and Joseph comes to mind, right? Because we know of their relationship, that there was a relationship, but we don't know anything about it. So I thought, blank canvas, right? But then I thought, well, I'd be stepping on these so many toes, and I'm not Christian. I was raised Anglican, but I don't consider myself Christian. And put it aside. And then one morning, I woke up and I had the character of the slave. His name is Metlip. And I woke up and Metlip, it was almost as if he was sitting beside the bed. That's how aware I was of him. And he explained to me why he was the perfect vehicle to use Joseph and Jesus as my father-son relationship. And that's how I got into it, because the book is from his point of view. Here's a father and his estranged son and his slave who's caught between them, right? And so there's so much conflict and stuff. And to be honest, once I started to incorporate Matlip into the story, it wrote itself. Like, I mean, it just poured out. It was like effortless. It just made itself known to me. There was no studying. There was no. Well, I mean, I did study. I had to study to do my I did my research to make sure that I was saying the right things at the right time. But in terms of creativity, I didn't really need to think of anything. It just wrote itself. So it's
That's
not.
amazing.
It's a Christian story, but it's not a Christian story. And I haven't. In fact, I haven't. I haven't even been able to peg it in a genre, because it's not a Christian story. It's not an adventure. It's not a thriller. It's not a romance. It's not this. It's not that. It's just a story. Like but it holds together. I mean, it's everybody who's read it says it's excellent. Um, but I turned down a publishing contract because they wanted me to change the character of Joseph,
All
and
right.
to have changed him the way they wanted me to change him would have ruined the entire story. So I said no,
Hmm.
and I walked away from it and published it myself. But no big deal. Um,
Fantastic.
the the other story, the last 3 days, somebody it was originally a screenplay. Somebody once asked me why I had never written a family drama. I was like, I don't know. My children were growing up. I didn't have grandkids. What would make me write a family drama, you know? But then
Where's
I
the
thought, well,
drama?
what would I write if I did? And so that just kind of went into the back of my mind. And so then it occurred to me, well, the only really interesting element of that to me was that night where you go to bed as a child and you wake up as an adult, your 18th birthday here in Canada, right? Everything changes, right? Like you can drink, like you can do all these things that you can't do before. Not that I didn't, but you're not supposed to. Um, and so then I thought, well, okay, so this if I'm going to write a story about that night and that transition from child to adulthood, the character he has to be on the cusp of turning 18, but he has to think of himself as an adult, but those around him, like his parents, for instance, don't like think he's a child still, and he has to have a choice, and he can either make an adult choice or an immature choice, and of course he makes the immature choice, and he gets himself stranded like in the middle of nowhere, and all of a sudden there's an asteroid, which is that was for fun. I mean, you need to have stakes in a story, and I didn't. My character Nick didn't have any stakes. I mean, yes, he got stuck far from home, but no rush to get home, right? So I needed something to make him hurry up, and so the asteroid was it. And I I knew that I would never sell it as a screenplay. In fact, I used it to get into I used the script itself to get into this workshop with I don't want to name names, but he's a very famous screenwriter, and he actually wrote one of my favorite movies, and he thought that the story was fantastic, but he said, Chris, you'll never get it made in Hollywood for sure, never, never. It's just not the kind of story that they make. So I was like, okay, no problem. So I wrote it just as an exercise. I wrote it for myself. I needed to get it out of my head, so I had to write it down, and just became it became something fun for myself. But I think it's a very tight little story that's got all the elements of what you need for a character in a script to to evolve emotionally and to learn to be, in Nick's case, to learn to be an adult or think like an adult.
I had a question to ask you,
Mhm.
whether you look for inspiration or the inspiration finds you. So it seems from what you have said that it's mostly the second option.
Yes, it is a matter of inspiration finding me, but I have this creative experiment or trick that I use. Uh, I will hear a phrase or I will see a sign, and I will think, okay, well, what if that sign was the title of a book or a novel or a screenplay? What would that story be about? And then I start asking, what if, and that's the magic. That's the magic of story. You keep asking what if, and every time you think of something, go, well, but what if that, and then what if that, and eventually you start to find inspiration. It's all around you, and you find that, like, I've I have never I have never lacked for story ideas. I must have 50 files of on my computer where even if it's just what if this happened, what if this happened, how about a guy this that does this, and Of course, they're all churning around in the back of my head, and sometimes they connect. And then once they connect, it's like, well, okay. And then now I have a new set of what if questions to ask, and then then I ask them, and if I can't answer them, they goes to the back, and eventually they answer themselves, and they come back and go, well, what about this? We could you could do this, right? And it's like, well, I guess I could. Well, what if that then? And so there's the slow organic process. Yeah, that's the trick to writing, as far as I'm concerned, is story. If you know your story well enough, like these folks that say, write every day, write a blog every day, like, to what end? Um, I I could never do that, because I don't think that what I have to say is important enough to other people to get their attention, and otherwise, and if not, then I'm wasting my time. So I would rather post less and post stuff that is important to me, or that I think has a point, or has a intent or purpose, rather than just to be able to say, well, I'm a writer because I've written 500 words a day for the last 3 years. Well, no, you're not a writer. Like, if you don't know what's the point of what you're saying? Like, if you're just saying just to get the words out, you're not a writer. Okay, there's nothing. Open at any. Oh, find your favorite novel or your favorite author and one of his novels, and open it in the middle. There's no magic there. It's just words on page, right? Because that's not the point. The words on the page is not the point. That is simple literacy. The story is the point. It's how the author makes you feel, the emotions that he drags you through, like the adventures he makes you imagine, or the things he makes you imagine. That's what a writer is. That's a storyteller. Writing just to write. No, I don't. Nobody's going to explain, or going to argue, convince me otherwise, that just writing is beneficial for anyone. No, writing is just exercising literacy. It's storytelling. That's where the magic comes from.
I was just thinking that this relates really well to your idea about the what if questions, because if something caught your attention and you started asking what
Mhm.
if, you then begin to figure out where your train of thoughts are heading.
Mhm.
And if it's heading into an interesting direction, you can follow it along, probably making notes here and there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Notes for all of those 50 files or so that I have on my computer upstairs. I have a notebook dedicated to each one. Most of them are empty, or maybe just have a couple of pages of scratched. But that doesn't matter, because eventually I'll get back to them, or I'll die first. But you know, I'll get back to them eventually.
So, do you carry a notebook with yourself at all times, just in case something
Yes.
pops into your head,
When I
or do
when
you
I when
use
I
other kind of?
I'm not as mobile now as I used to be. But if I'm out, or if I'm traveling, or even on a road trip, right, like going to the beach, whatever, I'll have a knapsack, and I'll have a notebook in my knapsack. The novel, The Father, the Son, and the Slave, I filled 9 notebooks just with ideas for
Wow.
that story, as it came to me. And I filled these notebooks up until I had no more obvious questions about the story, or about what I wanted to have happen in it, or what I was trying to say in it. And it was at that point that I took those 9 notebooks, and I started a file in a computer. As I went through my notebooks, and I transcribed, I organized the notes, and so that there was some kind of logical order, and I was grouping descriptions and parts, like the narrative, like the because sometimes I will, especially in that novel, it came to me mostly in dialogue between the characters, in
Mhm.
like uh, defining each of their positions for on stuff. And so okay, so I write down this dialogue, and then when I was transcribing it into the notes file, um, I was like, oh well, okay, this would have to come after that piece, but before this piece. So I started to. That's how I started to organize the story, so that the dialogue flowed, and then it was just a matter of adding the structural things like the time frame. It's a 4 day journey between Nazareth and Jerusalem, um, but it takes 5 days because they get kicked out of the caravan, so they get delayed a little bit. And it's not. I mean, Nazareth is what 65, 68 miles away from Jerusalem, but at the time you couldn't travel straight south from Nazareth because that was Samaria, and the Hebrews wouldn't go into Samaria. They considered them like uh, uh, less than, and so the caravan had to go to along the northern border, like the Jezreel Valley, to the uh, River Jordan, the Jordan Escarpment, and then down the west side of the escarpment and around. So there's this detour that they had to do. So
Right.
um, yeah, so I mean, what should take 2 days takes 4, 5, right? So and then it was just a matter of okay, well, um, then the logistics of the caravan, the places where they would most likely stop would be the places where they could water the animals because it would be, so you just start to build the background for for the dialogue so that it all flowed properly, and it just like it really just it wrote itself. It was just a matter of filling the blanks, as it were.
So the dialogues came first.
Yeah, that was that story. The dialogue came first,
Yes.
but because and I think that was because um, the main conflict was the father, like Joseph, who was trying to convince my character is named Yesu, to abandon this crazy idea of being a prophet and come back to carpentry. But
Right.
Yesu was a shitty carpenter to begin with, right? Like I mean, I made, and this is where I think perhaps I step on some feet, is because um, my characters are not biblical characters, right?
Right.
Um, and they're not what you expect. Like if you start the book expecting to find this divine Christ, you're certainly not going to find him there. Sorry,
Not in this book,
not in this
definitely.
book. No, he's a guy. Like he's human. He's like
A
you or I,
person. Yeah.
right? But he's just got this fate that he can't get away from. So
So in a way, we could say that Jesu was a little bit like a writer. He cannot get away from his calling
yes,
because I believe if
yes,
you are truly a writer,
yes.
there's something calling you to be expressed, to be written out.
To
Is
tell
done.
stories, right? To just
Yeah.
and that's what drove me was I wanted to people to read my stuff and go off into these crazy places that I went off to when I was a kid, reading, and I still read. I mean, look, see, I have bookshelves
Yeah.
and bookshelves stuffed with books. Okay, they're books. I have more. Yeah, I have so many books, so many books.
So what do you think you spend more time on, reading or writing at
Writing,
this phase at least?
writing now.
Writing. Yeah.
Um, I I have to be honest. I have several. I mean, I've got a huge library of ebooks. Okay, but I hate reading on my phone. I hate reading on
Yeah.
my phone,
I understand.
and that's for work, right? Like and I start reading, and something will pop into my head, and okay, well, I'll go back to my writing files, and add a note here, and then I get stuck into that, and I don't go back to my writing. I like a book. I want to sit down with a physical book, pages, and turn. Like that's maybe I'm just old fashioned. I'm like I'm an old man now, so um,
Do you use pen or pencil to take notes on your books?
I will never write in a book. I used to write in my
Yeah,
textbooks, but I would never make notes in a novel or anything. On my notebooks, yeah, I always use a pen, and it has to be a fat barrel pen, and it has to be blue, and it has to, it's just,
specific.
like I'm not a big fan of black ink, right? Blue ink,
Mm,
just blue ink seems to be more informal. It's more inviting. A fat barrel pen fits in my fingers better than a thin little, like a thin one. And but yeah, so you give me these tools, and I'm a happy boy. Like I just I just go off into my own little world.
So, but you said that most of your writing are actually screenplays, and you have mentioned to me that one of the screenplays, I believe, is now
Yes,
being considered by Netflix and a Canadian broadcaster.
I've written two TV concepts. This first one, um, that uh, that is being developed right now, is a dark twist on a modern Robin Hood,
Hmm,
except where Robin
right.
Hood was a noble who had lost everything, and was called to be a hero to help the vulnerable, like the peasants, right, that he would not have helped before. My hero is a soldier with post-traumatic stress who
Mm,
finds himself homeless, and has to protect the vulnerable and the homeless, and that's actually set here in Winnipeg, from a rising meth kingpin. So he's
right.
essentially the sheriff, right? So yeah. But anyway, so we've got 8 episodes, and it's cross your fingers, cross your fingers.
Cross fingers as well. Good.
The other television concept I came up with was a young adult story. It's called Young Demons, and
Ink Demons. This one I read about.
yeah,
Yeah,
and yeah, this is the theme about this is nature versus nurture. Okay, so
yeah.
these five imps are relocated to Earth for their own safety, right? Because there's a civil war going on in hell, and the first thing they do is they banish their mentor, their protector, right?
Hmm. Mm,
And so they're these demons that don't know a lot about being demons. All of a sudden, have to define themselves, and so in this in the world, there's the bargain, which is this agreement between God and Lucifer as to, that bans each of them from coming to Earth, right? But sets the rules as to what angels can do to influence men, what demons can do to influence men, or to get their souls. And so this give and take, this balance, and it's all about free will. And um, I had plotted 3 seasons of television. Like, I had an overall arc for the 3 seasons. I had annual arcs for them. I had all my characters and what they were going to do. But then I decided, you know what? I want to write a novel. So that's what I'm working on
that
right now.
sounds
Is
like a
is
brilliant.
the three
Sounds like
novels,
a
the
brilliant
trilogy.
novel.
Yeah, I think very visually, right? And I really dislike the when I'm planning a story, which is why one of the reasons why I use notebooks is, uh, when I want to plot and organize, I use Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, which is a drawing
Right.
program, and it just creates this huge artboard, and I just start plotting things and drawing lines, and rearranging them, and uh, you know linking everything together, and so then,
Hmm.
and for a timeline, right? So this has to happen before this, and this has to happen before that, and so then I kind of structure my story that way, and or that's what I did with these books, because they're so big, right? Like, I mean, the project is actually 3 books, not just 1 book. So I had to make sure that I had I had 3 separate one page, one panel for each book, and then I'd have to start one story element here, and I'd have to show how I'd have to remind people about it somewhere in the second book, but it only came to fruition at the end of the third book, right? So, and yeah, so it's really complicated. So I find that when I'm working that way to do my timelines and relationships visually on a big screen, so I've got this huge monitor on my laptop upstairs.
Well, it's still very good for people that are planning to write something larger than an article that requires more time to think and plan and notes and schedule and reschedule and put into different places. I believe that putting everything on the timeline when it should
Yes,
happen,
the
even,
timelines are hugely important,
is crazy.
and
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the timeline is. It doesn't matter. I mean, I've done stories where the timeline has been years, but there have been brief chunks of intimate or intricate time, and then big vast gulf between the next little bit. But it doesn't matter as long as it's on a timeline and you can plot it and you can. It helps so that you don't find yourself at the end of the book going, oh shit, well he was dead like chapter 3. Why is
Why
why
is
is
he
he
still
here?
here?
So anyway, um,
So, so if we think about, let's say, that story comes first,
yes,
that you have to know the timeline.
yes.
What other tips for people that want to write, let's say, novels, would you suggest to have in mind?
Thing is that it's all your hero. Okay, always has two journeys. Okay,
Okay,
and they have to be. They're like two sides of a coin because they both belong to the same coin, but they're different. One is, and the more important one is the interior journey, his emotional journey. Pardon me.
right.
Now, the character has a goal. Okay, like he has to get the girl. He's got to rob the bank. He's got to, save the elephant. Whatever. But why is he doing that? Is the question you have to ask. It like what makes him feel like that what makes him feel he has to do that. That's the interior journey. For the elephant, well, maybe it was because um, he as a kid he watched an elephant get murdered and he could do nothing about it, and it's really felt, it's a flaw. Like he's felt so guilty, like even if it was guilt, he's felt guilty all his life, so now he has a chance to make him to redeem himself. So that's his interior journey, right? And so then of course then the story will be about these obstacles that help his interior, like they're physical obstacles that he's got to overcome in order to save the elephant. But at the same time, each of those obstacles is teaching him a lesson along his emotional development, evolution. So there's the two stories. Theme theme is hugely important to me. I know it doesn't have to be, but um, I find that if once I've determined my theme, that um, the story itself becomes easier to write. There's less there's less doubt because well, if you're gonna stick to your theme, then this has to happen. If you're gonna stick to your theme, he has to have this attribute, or this character trait. If you're gonna stick to your theme, he has to have this flaw, and you have to fix it that way. Like so. Then your creativity becomes more constructive. You're not wasting your imagination thinking about, oh no, maybe I can make him a flower child, or whatever. Or it's like it's focused. It's focused. You've got purpose and intent, and that's crucial. That's crucial because if you don't have that intent, you'll never get it finished.
Gotcha.
You have to have that intent fuels your motivation to keep going. Right? If you're not, if you don't have, yeah, if the story doesn't grab you, like as the writer doesn't grab you, then you're never ever going to spend the time or devote the time. It's always go, oh no, there's a football game on. I'll watch that. I'll do it. I'll write later, right? And then of course then there's
Right.
another football game, and then, whatever. So um, yeah,
Do you think that the same applies not just to novels, but to any forms of writing? Let's say articles, screenplays.
yeah,
Uh,
articles. I'm not an I'm no expert on articles. Like I didn't. I mean, I joined Medium so I could serialize the father, the son, and the slave. Okay.
right.
But even so, the chapters are still twice, three times longer than normal Medium article lengths. So that was a big flop. Okay. But
Mm.
while I was there, I started to read some of the advice on Medium for writers, and I was like, no, 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 you got it all wrong. So I started to, forgive me, I began to write comments to these articles going, no, you've got it all wrong. This, you got to do this, you got to do this. And then the comments were just as long as the articles, right? So that,
Right.
no, that's not going to solve any problem. So then I took the comments, cut them and made them into their own articles. And so that's how all that, I never intended to blog. I never intended to write articles on writing. I just was trying to correct what I thought was garbage on some of the advice from Medium. So
So, which of the advice do you think are the most counterproductive to actually becoming a competent writer? From the ones that you have read, at least.
write every day, write for your readers, because see that's the difference between like a write like I write stories that occur to me that mean something to me. They don't fit like the father, the son, and say they don't fit a genre. Like they're but I don't care. Like
Mhm.
that's the story I want to tell. If you start to well, because Outlander was successful, so now you got a woman that she's in an airplane crash, and she wakes and she gets up and she's in another place, and you know no, that's been done before. Like that's not writing, that's not creativity, that's marketing, that's just profit, that's just let's see what we can get away with
Repeating
to
the
make
same
money,
formula.
right? Like there's nothing redeeming about it. um
Yeah.
so uh yeah, so it's the right every day, just to call yourself a writer. It's the it's the uh it's writing without purpose. If you
Mm.
can't just write. Nobody cares what you think, unless whatever you think might make a difference to them, right? Like
Yeah.
um
Gotcha.
which is what I try to share in my things on writing. I mean, you don't get a lot of time on Medium or a lot of space to enunciate an idea, so you have to chop it up into quick little blurbs. But there's nothing wrong with that, because quick little blurbs seem to stay with people more than huge novel or huge books on writing technique. And don't read don't read books on writing technique. They're garbage. If you want anything, you want reference books.
I do also believe on an instinctual level, because I don't have enough experience or practice in writing to decipher which of the advice are true, which of them are false, let's say. But I have a gut feeling that this doesn't seem right.
Another kind of article on Medium that really bothers me is seven magazines that are accepting new writers, and then they'll say, well, and the National Geographic, the Smithsonian Institute, the Smithsonian Magazine, the Atlantic Magazine, all these really high end magazines, and the introductory paragraph is going to say, look, um, these articles or these magazines pay $5,000 for 2,000 words, and they accept stuff from new writers. Well, no, they don't. They don't, because a magazine like the Atlantic, it's not just about quality writing; it's about who they have writing. It's important to them to look like they know what they're doing. So they're gonna take a shitty article from a well-known writer over a brilliant article from an unknown writer any day of the week, right? Even if
Right.
the unknown writer is willing to give the article for free just to get it published, they'll go, no, thanks, because this is this guy's name. He's got this reputation, and he brings his reputation to add to our reputation, and so it makes us bigger, it makes us better, it makes us look good. So no, none of those articles. Right? There's no cheating. There's no all these articles on Medium that promise secrets to this and secrets to that. No, there's no secret. There's no secret. You got to put the time in. You have to think about what it is you want to say, and there's no getting around it. If you think that your goal is to mislead or misdirect or fool your audience, you're not a writer. You're a marketer.
Yeah.
So and
That there's a difference.
yeah,
There's
such a
a big difference
difference.
between
Such
those
a
two.
difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the intention is absolutely different as well. I still feel like many people believe that they can earn thousands on thousands on Medium if they just get the right headline and enough people to click their article.
They
But
don't like the.
I
I was invited to
no.
join the Medium Partner Program because I was getting over 10,000 reads a month, uh, and they said like you can make money at this, but for 25,000 reads, you make about $750.
Mhm,
25,000 reads is 2.5 months work or 2.5 months of
mhm.
readership. $750 as earnings for 2.5 months of work is bullshit. Like it's not worth it. It's not worth it. So, and to me, I'm looking to build readership. So, um, I'm cutting my own throat if I put my articles behind a paywall because fewer people will read them.
Yeah.
Right. So
Mhm.
you have to decide. And Medium, I don't know. Medium could be so much better than it is, and they know this, but I don't understand why they choose not to. Like,
Mm.
for instance, the $5 a month membership fee goes 250 goes to Medium, and 250 gets split up and allocated some crazy ass algorithm that uh, based on who you read in a month. Okay.
Mhm. Yep.
But what that does is that encourages these clickbait articles. Like this. Read this. We got a secret here, right? Like click and read the secret. When they don't really, right? They're just clickbait. But because you click, they're getting the penny, right? And what would be much better was if Medium allowed the users to determine who got their money, but they won't do that. And
Right.
if they did do that in a single stroke, they would ramp up the quality of their platform because all these people with the clickbait articles will get no reads. There'd be no point for them to be
Right.
there, right? And those writers that were putting the time in, those writers that were making a difference, they would start to earn money, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's so obviously rational, and I've tried to explain, and they just no, they don't want to hear anything about it. So,
Did you try to connect with them in
oh,
some
I
way?
have I've
Uh,
three or four times,
right.
and
Okay.
they just ignore me.
Okay.
And this
Do,
thing
do
about
they write back at least?
nope, nope, not even acknowledgement,
Okay.
not even.
Nothing.
And
Wow.
this new thing with artificial intelligence.
Mhm. ChatGPT and all the other.
Well, I love
Uh,
ChatGPT. I've spent lots of time on ChatGPT. It's hilarious. It's great. It's a lot of fun. But what people fail to understand is that ChatGPT isn't teaching you anything new. Well, no, that's not true. They may be teaching you something new, but what they're teaching is not new because it's all based
per
on
se. Yeah.
previous human effort, right? Like all it Chat GPT knows is what it's been trained on, and everything it's been trained on is old human output, right?
Yeah, all the
So,
experience.
so I mean, sure, Chat GPT is really is amazing at being able to paraphrase what you've heard before over and over and over again, but you're never going to get anything new because it's not capable of giving you anything new. It's not capable of
Hmm.
advancing anything. It's only good at remixing. It's like a DJ, you know.
Yeah, I do understand that. I never tried using ChatGPT even for purposes of fun, but I had the same idea about it, that it's everything that is taken from the memory of humankind and put
Hmm.
into a computer.
Hmm.
So, and we do live by our memories. They guide us in a specific direction. But if there's no update to those memories from new experiences, well, it's all dead. You know, it's
Yes.
not
Yeah.
there's nothing
Okay. Yes.
revitalizing.
And for art, for instance, like technology, advances in technology drive culture much in the same way that new challenges in an environment promote evolution, like physical evolution of like you get a new predator. The bird has to fly into higher up in the trees, which means the beak shape changes because it's a different kind of food element. In culture, though, um, we have technology and overpopulation, things like that, that drive cultural change. But there's also a proactive element, and that's artists, creative humans, writers and artists push the boundaries of what we know and what we accept is culturally acceptable, and they push the boundaries. Chat or AI art, for instance, okay, is going to put all these creative humans into breadlines and
Mm.
and strip culture of that progressive, proactive of effort. And so what happens is that all of a sudden now you're getting lots of beautiful AI pictures, but they're all just remixes. They'll never so culture will get bland and boring and banal. Like it'll stagnate, and you'll get none of the.
Maybe it's gonna, because it's something novel and something new at the
Yes,
moment.
that's true.
People are going into it
Oh,
because of
pardon
the novelty and the surprise of it happening, because it caught me by surprise as well.
me. Hmm.
But if it's going to become repetitive,
Hmm.
well, people will, I believe, will get saturated from
Saturated,
it,
yes.
and then they would come back to creating themselves again, because there's a natural proclivity for people to create. It's something
Yes, that's true.
unique to us as a
That's
species.
entirely
So
true. Yes.
you cannot get that out, because if you feel like creating and you do not do that, it will, well, it feels as though it's eating you up inside, because it doesn't go anywhere, just
Hmm.
like anger that is not expressed in a subtle way, or any
Indeed.
emotion or anything
Indeed.
else. So you will
Oh,
still have to find a medium, to make a pun out of it,
yeah.
a medium of expression in
Yes.
one way or another. But I believe that for some people it's quite hard, because they have ideas, they have the creative drive, but they don't have the right principles or the discipline, or even the idea how to structure their work into something tangible. Because I can say that I have this phrase, that I have a novel inside of me.
Uh
Well, that doesn't mean much until it's a novel outside of me.
huh.
So
Yes. Yeah. So
so so how
you have the passion to write a novel, but you're not sure how to go about it. Or yeah.
how to get that novel inside of me outside of you?
Well, the
How to make
the
that transition?
yeah. Um. The another I tried for a long time to write. My professors told me just write, Chris, just write, and it'll come. You'll find your voice. No, because I didn't know what I wanted to write. You can't write if you don't know what you want to write about. And so my stories, they didn't go anywhere. The characters were boring. I mean, I could write well. I mean, the words sounded great, but they didn't tell you anything. They didn't take you anywhere. And so that's actually I walked away from writing for 20 years because
Wow, that's a long gap.
I had a degree in English, right? And composition was my thing, and I could do poetry, I could do articles, write articles, journalism, whatever, but I couldn't, I couldn't write a story. So I walked away and became an artist. And it wasn't until two friends of mine had written this crazy ass screenplay, and they needed a producer. So I said, "Hey, I'm not doing anything. I'll do it." Okay. So I entered
Mhm.
the film industry as a producer, and um, that didn't entirely work out. But that was partially my own naivete. But what it did teach me was that I didn't want to be a producer. I want to be a writer.
Yeah.
And I all these stories that I saw that or read, and it was like, no, this is terrible. It's terrible, terrible, terrible. I could do better. And that was the thing is the day I said, well, I can do better. And so I sat down to start writing or to learn to write screenplays. I would actually even say that if you're to aspiring writers, you should learn how screenplays work. Screenwriting is where you learn to tell is where you learn story. So learn to write a screenplay. Learn the 3 act structure. Learn how your protagonist's journey, the interior journey, and the external journey. You learn in the screenplay. You have to, the 15 minutes, and the average movie is 90 minutes. So first 15 minutes is your 15-20 minutes is your act one. At the end of which is where you establish who your character is, what he needs, what he wants, and also what he needs. You introduce your antagonist, and the secondary characters, the support characters, and then you have the hero offered a chance to do this, to pursue this goal that they decline, and then something
Mhm.
happens, which is your instigating incident, which forces your hero onto his path. Okay, and then there's a series of obstacles. For instance, so the instigating incident, the hero reacts just like anybody else would. He would call the cops, or he reacts emotionally, and it fails. Okay, whatever. So now he's going to try again. So now he starts to think about it, and he tries again, but then he realizes he can't do it by himself. So then he goes back and
Mhm.
he starts to find his team, and so the team, tries, and they're still not. They didn't consider all the various things that they needed to, and so that fails. But each time they make a little more progress, but each time they fail, but they learn something until they um, the last failure is when the hero doesn't has refused to change his emotional flaw, right? Which he needs to do before he can succeed, and so that's his big drop. So he always at the just after the midpoint, you have the character or your hero uh, fail miserably, and they come so close to giving up, but then they realize, oh yeah, but if I change this, they recognize their flaw and how to change it, and they do, and then they make their final approach to the climax and win, right, and win the day. It's but when you the structure works, okay, that structure works to carry a story and a protagonist through his journey, interior and external. And if you at least try to drape your plot over these structural story beats, um, you're going to learn story, right? And then once you've got that, then you know what you want to write. It's a matter of always keeping the forest in mind when you're studying the trees, right? so that
Hmm.
you're never lost. You always know where the boundary is. You always know to stay within the lines, and you know, yeah. And then writing, then you when you know your story well enough and you begin to write, the writing isn't an effort anymore. The writing is just trying to get everything out before you forget it, kind of thing, right? And the writing, your
Mm.
voice is there. Your voice is there. It's not. You don't have to look for it. You have to find. You got to learn story. Then your writing will come. You can't do it the other way around. Cannot do it the other way around.
Is this predicated on Joseph Campbell by any chance? On his theory of the hero's journey, the mythologist Joseph Campbell by any chance?
Maybe I'm unfamiliar. I'm sure I came across him sometime in my life, but I'm an old man now, so I just
He wrote a book called A Hero with a Thousand Faces, where he studied different mythologies from all over the globe, from different cultures, and tried to find what makes them
yes, and
similar,
actually
you
yes.
could say.
I came across this study done in 2016 by um, professor or somebody at the University of Virginia and somebody at the University of Adelaide, and they took the they used the Gutenberg library, like the Gutenberg collection of books, and
Hmm.
they fed them all into an AI, and they determined that there were six emotional story arcs that permeate
Right.
like any story is one of six story arcs, emotional story arcs, where the you go from the first one, and there are three pairs, um, positive, and each pair has a positive and a negative. So, for instance, the first pair is simple, uh, either rags to riches, right? So you start small and you go up, right? Or riches to rags. Okay. Then the second
Mm.
one is either what they call the man in the hole, where a guy starts off high, goes down in the hole, and then builds himself back up, right? Or he starts off low, he gets this like Scarface. He goes starts low, he gets high, and then he crashes again. Okay. And then you have the double dip, where you start low and you get high, and then you fall again, but then you eventually reach your a better goal, bigger goal, right? Or they call that the last one, the Icarus. They're actually mirror images. Each pair is a mirror image journey of the other, of its pair. Um, but yeah, everything comes down to six essential emotional arcs, and
Wow.
that's another thing, that a crucial element that aspiring writers need to know is the whole idea of these emotional arcs and what it is, because that's the journey that your interior journey that your character goes on. And so once you've got that, once you know what that's going to be, mapping the outside, the external one becomes much easier. Like it almost falls into place. It's like inevitable. So,
Wonderful. Well, Chris, I think we're slowly reaching the end of our conversation in this episode.
well, thank you.
So
Thank you,
so this
Paul.
this was brilliant. Thank you.
Take care.